If you've ever built a car audio system, odds are you've soldered a few wires together. Now for the longest time, I've used just this little stationary soldering station and a simple wire holder, but there are some downsides to this setup and I need to make some upgrades. What are all of these items I've added to improve my soldering process, and should you get them for your car audio upgrades? What's going on, guys? I'm Mark. Welcome to Car Audio Fabrication, the show where together we learn how to master car audio and how to design, build, and install our dream car audio system. Let's dive in and take a look. The biggest upgrade I made to my soldering station, and I expect this to have the biggest impact on my efficiency, is a new portable soldering iron. You can see this is the Milwaukee M12 portable soldering iron, and there's a few things that I really like about this. When we first turn this on, we get a blinking green indicator, and we have to wait for that light to turn solid in order to know that the temperature of the tip is up to temp. There we go, solid green, so we know that we are up to temperature. You can also see that there is an LED light. This is going to be perfect for being portable and working inside a vehicle. It can light the space that we're working on, and since we're not attached to a cord, it's not like we're tripping all over this, and we don't have to worry about plugging into an extension. Now, when I turn this off, it's going to have a red indicator, and that reminds us that the tip is still hot. So obviously we'd want to be careful about where that tip is while this is still hot, but what is nice is if we set it on its side, unlike some of these other soldering irons that can kind of wobble and easily touch something you don't want them to, you can see that this is much more robust and solid, and no matter how we set it down, the tip stays above the surface. We could also obviously set it like this. We can also rotate the head of the tool, which may come in handy depending on what we're working on. Now, I've held off on using a portable soldering iron for the longest time because I always felt like the battery technology wasn't really there. They wouldn't get quite hot enough and they would always take a while to get hot. But with these new lithium batteries, that's definitely not the case. I would say this warms up in less than 30 seconds. And it has more than enough power for soldering some of the larger wires that we need to in car audio. Speaking of all the different wiring in car audio, I do want to take a quick second to thank our monthly channel sponsor, New Concepts. I've got a new build coming up in an F-150, so I put in my order to get all the different wiring and wiring accessories for that build. And you can see that New Concepts offers a ton of different things so that you can get everything you need for wiring your system. They've got power and ground wire in all different sizes and colors. They've got speaker wire. They've got a lot of different RCA wire options, which is really nice because it's nice to have the different lengths that you might need. They have this unique 4-channel RCA wire, which is really nice for running signal from the head unit back to your DSP or your amplifiers. They've got all sorts of fuses in the different sizes, different connectors for your wire. Of course, wire distribution, so your fuse blocks of different sizes. Tons of different options there. If you guys want to learn more about them, check them out at the link down in the video description. The next soldering station upgrade is this silicone soldering mat. If you've ever done soldering before, you know that little bits of the solder that are superheated can fall off and they can get on your work surface, and that can lead to you destroying a table, or even worse, if you're working inside a vehicle, it can lead to hurting the vehicle. It could burn into the carpet, it could burn a hole through the vinyl. It's definitely something you want to avoid. So I figured by having this little mat here, especially now that we have the portable tool, this will give us something that we can put underneath our work area to make sure we're not getting any of that hot solder on anything. A couple of cool features about this mat, it's hard to see here on camera, but they do have a ruler on here. I figured that might be nice for measuring out lengths of heat shrink before I cut them, or making sure that I'm stripping wires the same length. That's just something handy that's nice to have. It also has these different little compartment areas so that you could put screws or heat shrink or whatever else on there to make sure it doesn't roll away. There are also a bunch of small little numbered areas. That way, if you were taking something really small apart and you wanted to keep track of all those little screws or all the little electrical components, or if you were building something, you could put all of your electrical components on there and have them numbered. That's also nice to have as well. Don't forget that I'm going to have a link for all these different things down in the video description. Now, the thing that I was wondering about this is how heat resistant is this really? And obviously you'd want to avoid this, but let's say your soldering iron did accidentally touch it. Would it hurt the mat? We're going to find out. You can see we have our soldering iron up to temperature. Let's test this. Let's see if we can get it to melt. I would say that's pretty heat resistant right there. It definitely left It left a little bit of a char mark, but obviously I was holding that on there for quite some time. It's not like it's going to melt if you just touch it. Look, I'm just touching it. It's not really doing anything. So I think it's safe to say heat resistant. Obviously you don't want to leave the soldering iron on there for a long time, but if it does accidentally touch it, it's not going to hurt it. Now, when we're soldering, you're probably familiar with the fact that when we apply the solder, we have that flux in there and it's going to start to smoke. So the next upgrade is a smoke extractor. This version here does plug in. I'm sure they make portable versions. Maybe you guys have some recommendations for that, and maybe that's a future upgrade, but for now I went with the plug-in version, and you can see that it has a really large, essentially computer style fan on the inside. We have a little switch on the side here, so we can turn that on. It's fairly quiet. It has a little carbon filter on the front here, and it did come with a replacement filter, so we can replace that in the future, but I definitely want to test this out. There we go, it definitely pulls those fumes. Let's see, even if we're over here, quite a distance away, still has no problem extracting them and pulling them through the filter. Obviously you guys could see those fumes going in, and I was curious too if you would be able to see them going out, so I test that as well, and it does seem that the filter here does a good job of capturing the smoke and it doesn't come out the other side. Now when we're soldering, it's important that we keep our tip nice and clean, and that's why in the past I would always use this little sponge. You get this sponge wet and then you could clean the tip on it as you were working. The problem with the sponge is you'd always have to dip it in water and get it nice and wet before you started working. It was just kind of a pain to do, so that's why I upgraded to this brass sponge tip cleaner. The sponge is inside of a silicone little container here, and you can see it's flexible, but the silicone is much like this. It's a high temperature resistance, and the idea here is that when your tip is hot, you could just kind of push it in like so in order to clean it. So let's test this out as well. I've got the fume extractor running. We've got a nice clean tip here. Let's get some solder on it in order to kind of get it a little bit dirty. Add a little bit more here. So you can see it's kind of gooped up on there. Let's dip it into the brass. The idea is you just kind of touch it in there. And there we go, now we are good and clean. Now our next upgrade here is in this box, and I'm going to have to do some assembly, so let's get this built. So I've got everything assembled now. What this tool is called is a helping hand. As you can see, it has these flexible alligator clips that we can clip onto things like wires or little circuit boards, and we can hold them in place so that we can do our soldering. Now the one that I used to have is this guy right here. It was just too small. It kind of easily moves around even if you barely touch it, and that would lead to having issues when you're trying to work with it. That's because the base isn't that big and heavy, whereas on this one, it's a nice big piece of plate steel, and you can see it also has these little rubber pads on the bottom, so that kind of prevents it from sliding around. And you can see now this is a lot more stout, so it's a lot easier to work on. Also, adjusting these was kind of a pain. You'd always have to loosen up this little wing nut here and kind of articulate everything around. It really wasn't as flexible as you needed it to be, whereas this, you can quickly find a different location for each of these. You also have two more now that you can use to hold stuff together, so it should be a really nice upgrade. Now there are two other things that were part of my previous kit of soldering tools. One is this little solder spool holder right here. This is 3D printed, and it just makes it nice and easy to take the strand of the solder off of the spool. And the other is this guy here. This has a bunch of slots in it. Again, it's 3D printed. I 3D printed both of these, and this allows me to put the wire in like so, much like the helping hands, but this is just a little bit more of a fast, quick way to do it, much more portable, can take it in the vehicle. Obviously the helping hands are a little bit better if you're working on circuit boards or multiple different things and you need to hold them together, whereas a lot of times we're just connecting two wires together, so this is much more simple and easy to use. I know not everyone has a 3D printer, so if this is something that you would like me to make for you guys, let me know in the comments down below. So now that we have all of the new soldering upgraded kit here ready to go, I think we need to do that inaugural connection of this wire. Now I am definitely excited to use this new soldering gear. I can now protect the work surface with the mat, have the fumes and smoke extracted away from me, better hold the wires, not have to mess with the sponge, and work wirelessly. My new setup is definitely going to be a lot more efficient. Now don't forget, I put links to all the different gear that I showed in this video down in the video description. Next time you're installing a car audio system and you need a sweet speaker wiring necklace just like this, along with other power distribution accessories, definitely check out show sponsor New Concepts. You can learn more about all their different gear at the links down in the video description. A special thanks to them, along with Bart, Mike, Ali, Jerry, Marcos, William, and the rest of the Patreon membership team. A big thanks to all those guys for making these videos possible. And as always, my friends, thank you guys for tuning in and watching.